This is what I will talk of, and I purposely have put this word maritime in brackets, Indo-Pacific canvas, which any understanding of geography will call it maritime. So, a brief talk on the early Indian Ocean. I will take a few examples, West and East, one mention of West and the East, then some context of the Chola expedition in 1043, talk on the Malabar Might, the Maratha armor, and then how the timelessness of India's naval journey makes the difference. Now, this is a visual that is inspired by late Admiral Jayant Natkarni, who was sharing the story about, 100 million years ago, India started its first maritime journey. And that is this whole idea of Laurasia and Gondwana. And the process continued when the Indian subcontinent actually made a seafaring journey from Africa to crash into the Eurasian plate. So Admiral Natkani used to say, we began a maritime journey even before we were geographically formed. But maybe there wasn't sufficient maritime perspective into our mindsets. So there is this one line in my book I wrote which says, in many other countries, people go to the seaside to sail, swim, or surf. We go to Chapati to have pani puri. Okay, which is okay. I mean, it's good to have, it's a good snack, but that's the kind of context. Sometimes a bit more of maritime consciousness will make a difference. But Professor Madhav talked about 5,000 years. And so what happened? More than 5,000 years ago, once the Indian geographical landmass had got formed, the weather changes meant sea levels changed, and across to the west, the prominent location or landmark is today the government is developing the National Maritime Heritage Complex at Lothal, which is very different from where actual Lothal was. But then some things you have to locate conveniently, about nearly 80 kilometers away from Gandhinagar. And it is not the geography of today. It was actually, the sea was in there, and that kind of indicates our connectivity to the West. But I'm not going to linger more. I'm going to be very mindful of the time. This is the visual that I want to talk about. Who's talking about Indo-Pacific today in the 20th, 21st century? This is India's connectivity to the East, Southeast, Far East. I wish I had 3 hours to just talk on this one map. And maybe in future I will. Okay. How is this relevant? The Bay of Bengal used to be called Magh Kaling, based on the sea which was to the east, or today the Bay of Bengal. And Kaling, Indians were called Klings in much of Southeast Asia. And I had done a bit of climatological studies. And very interestingly, today is the 13th, and on 19th of November will be Kartik Purnima. And on Kartik Purnima, subject to what the Odisha government will allow, you will find these scenes, the one on the right, a festival called Boita Bandana, which is when young women, teens, unmarried young women, or in general now anyone, they don't take, of course, these kind of boats. They'll take plantain leaves and put a little bit of a lamp and go to any water body. But the original idea was that that was the day when the monsoon would change from the southwest monsoon to the northeast monsoon. And that is when the seafarers from Kaling set sail from there. And if these small boats that are being put as a festival celebration, if they had the seafaring ability, something like the visual representation by the Amar Chitrakatha comics, we had done some work with them, then the boat would actually reach Bali Island in Indonesia. So, both cultural evidence and the time frame in which it would reach Bali, there is a festival in Bali at the same time. So cultural connectivity talks, and today stands witness, even today in a practice, that we were connected across. So From there, let me jump some 10 centuries. And there has been this standard narrative that exists that, India is a very pacifist country, and others have come and attacked us, and we have never launched expeditions. Now, you need to know maritime history to know that that statement is not true. But there is a context to an expedition. What is the context? India had a thriving maritime trade that went across to west, to the east, and to the southwest. Because Gujarat was connected to East Africa, Malabar was connected to the Red Sea, the entirety of the East Coast was connected to East and Southeast. There have been enough talks. And around the time of the Chola Empire, do you know, we talk of Malacca dilemma today in a different context. That entire region of Malacca and Singapore was famous for piracy. It was a family business. Now, a little bit of piracy was okay. But when the basic freedom of sea trade started getting affected, then Rajendra Chola had to intervene. And that is the context in which he sends a complete expedition, and that creates mayhem, and in the process restores freedom of sea. So freedom of sea, when the Indian Navy started in 2008 anti-piracy operations, we were just carrying forward a legacy that India has always stood for freedom of navigation and freedom of sea. It's not a US strategy of FONOPS that happens in South China Sea and something. It is something which was very endemic to our own thought process. So that is the Chola legacy across the Indo-Pacific. And with what today is ASEAN, as I said, again, as I said, it's just to trigger your thought that we did this, we restored the context. So even before I come to the second millennia of the Common Era, Indian Ocean region through time and beyond, which today is Indo-Pacific, was represented by these three seas. A cultural infusion across the region. Commerce was the primary driver, and so connectivity happened across the seas. Oceans unite. I can go on telling you stories. I love telling stories, but about connectivity, and I'm myself writing a book which is talking about connectivity. This represented. What you will miss in this is military threat or contestation and conflict in a significant manner was missing in this region till much later. So let's go to the next part. Now, this is 2020 to us in Kerala. Mohanlal is called Laletan. He's a very famous actor. And by the way, both Mammootty and Mohanlal have now represented Kunjali Marakkars. So that's why I put the poster, just to, lighten the thing. But this is, everyone talks of colonization in 20th May 1498. This is an artist's depiction of Vasco da Gama, long story, lands up in front of Samudri, the Nair Hindu chieftain of Kozhikode. And that whole journey of he wanting to have exclusive trading rights. You know what was Calicut of the 15th century? It was modern free trade zone. And it was a cosmopolitan environment where people from every region, language, tribe were present. And there was a genuine sense of maritime integration across the place. I call it the Malabar legacy. So it's not unusual that the exercise which the India, Japan, US and Australia have, the Malabar exercise, it's a true legacy. But because it was not allowed, Vasco sails out, he connects with Kochi, and there follows a couple of decades of Portuguese brutality at sea. And there's this big battle of Calicut in 1503, and in which was the beginning of a century-long battle. For your information, I'll come to the next slide. For 100 years, the Portuguese could not make an inroad into the Malabar coast. 1507, Battle of Chaul, great thing to study. Diu, Battle of Diu, 1509, of course, the Pars did not get through. Finally, the Zamorin allows and Ponani, and there's a fort at Chaliam. So the Portuguese are given a little bit of thing. Then these four heroes, Muhammad Kunjali, called Kunjali Marakkar, Kutti Pokareli, Kunjali Marakkar the second, ruled for a very long time, not ruled, Pattu Marakkar, Kunjali Marakkar the third, and Muhammad Marakkar, Kunjali Marakkar fourth. Who were they? Okay, Marakkar itself will take a long definition. They were originally merchantmen from Kochi who had moved to the north, and when Calicut or Kozhikode was threatened, they offered to the Zamarin an ability to create a naval force. And from 1524 onwards, they made life miserable for the Portuguese, not letting them infuse into it. I recently at the Naval War College spent almost an hour and a half just going through much of what they did. Uh, what is very important is the ending. Kunjali Marakkar 4, by the time he comes on power, Zamarin has had enough. He felt that it was important to collaborate with the Portuguese, and Zamarin goes against his own military. Now, if that sounds a little familiar to some people from military and strategic fields, and I'm going to give another example. Finally, he betrays. Kunjali Marakkar 4 is captured. He's taken to Goa. He's quartered into 4 parts, and that was demonstrated. And the story of Marakkars comes to an end. It would take another nearly 100 years before the Marakkar legacy gets restored. And then the story of the Maratha armor. And Maratha armor, some things call it interesting. Let me just go forward. This is Konkan or Deccan region. And I purposely put these two visuals to give you the diversity of topography, from a plateau to a mount to a valley to the sea to beautiful corals. It is one of the geographically diverse and rich regions of the country. And into this region comes the grand Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, who had the vision to look to the sea. Either he built a fort, he repaired a fort, or he constructed a fort. And even in his early days, he had this vision that there is a requirement to build maritime trade and maritime components. So by the time his coronation happens towards the end of the 17th century, the thought processes of having a navy are already sown. But he is not the one who finally did it. And in this, there are two. The whole story of Janjira, which is not related to Maratha, in Janjira are the Siddhis who came from Abyssinia or East Africa, became Indians, and they could not be unseated for nearly 200 years. And Suvarnadurga is the place where finally the Sarkhel, or the admiral of the Maratha Navy, Kanhoji Angre. I know the 10th descendant, Sarkhel Raghuraja Angre, is in Alibag, good friend, and so we've shared a lot of stories. So Suvarnadurga becomes a symbol of resistance, and he made life absolutely miserable for the Englishmen. So correction, you must know that many people make this error that Shivaji and Angre were at the same time. They were separated by 80 years. So that was the component. Vijayadurg became the naval base. What was unique? There were these boats called the Gurabs and the Galvats. And Angres had complete coastal dominance from Savantwadi, which is very close to Goa, all the way to Raigad. They even captured the British vessels and Dutch vessels, and the English had no choice but to call Angre a pirate, because there was no other way they could get this thing. With that, I'm going to pause that story and jump forward. Finally, we know by 18th century, the Brits had finally defeated French after nearly 100 years of conflict, mainly in the Bay of Bengal, and finally they are in rulership. So these are two images on the west and the east. The Fort George, which is Mumbai Harbour, and the fortress there, and Fort William, which is Calcutta Harbour, and comes to the end of 18th century, and the English are in complete dominance. And that remains our reality for nearly 200 years. And after that comes one time slot, and that is what, because it's historical, I'm not going to cover too much of contemporary. India was at war. Now, many people say India constitutionally did not exist, but Indians took part in World War II. And I have in this old map put where all were Indians operating from the naval point of view. If I go to the Army story and the Air Force story, it's much wider. We were operating in the North Atlantic, in the Persian Gulf, in the Mediterranean. In Mediterranean, one of the naval ships was in charge of the anti-submarine force. Red Sea, East Africa, a major operation in Madagascar, South Indian Ocean, or South Central Indian Ocean was the story of Bengal. Andamans, both the Japanese attack and the recapture, Arakan in Burma. Why is this important? You know, even the British didn't want the Navy to develop. They felt there was no requirement of a complete independent Navy for the region of India. But there were a few people who allowed, and so when war happened, suddenly there was a rapid growth of Navy. Why is it important to our talk today into India? The people who are young pioneers like Admiral Katari, Soman, YK Singh, and many other people, Adhar Chatterjee, they saw the activity which is across global maritime theater, and that enabled them to be pioneers today. And so I come to my last two slides. What does it make a difference? Recently on 11th and 12th November, we had the Goa Maritime Conclave in which the Foreign Secretary and the Defense Secretary were there. And this is from the Foreign Secretary's talk, the first two bullets. He said the summary of Indian maritime power today is sea power is central to progress. And sea power is not only military. It is the ability to use the sea to maximum benefit. Blue economy is at the focus of the government. And the third is a bullet, which is the naval chief mentioned, and many of the chiefs together spoke about it, is collaborative competence. And I want to say collaborative maritime competence. This is the future of the Indo-Pacific. While military power and strategic thought remains the main interest of most of the audience, let me say, if you do not build collaborative competence and you don't strengthen the countries that are with you, not one country, you're not going to take on China or anyone else. And I want to close with this. This is my last slide because this is for the young researchers. So what do you do next? All this gyan is great. So I have just 3 points for you. Focus on growth, twofold growth. Grow yourself and grow your organization. And growth means you're not satisfied with what you know today, what you are today, develop. And that's why I have focused my life to be a growth coach. Knowledge influence. Why do we want to do research? Because we are not satisfied with the body of knowledge that exists today. I want to probe, like a professor said, new hypotheses, new understandings, reinterpretations, revisions. Okay, so that I can exercise an influence based on my knowledge through me and through me to others. And last is, as a mariner, I have to say, sea has many life lessons. Look at the seascape. It is so diverse, so vast, and that is the future that I have for us. So